I found out my parents stole $120,000 from me on a Tuesday morning. It wasn't like I tripped over a bank statement or they came clean. No, it hit me like a truck while I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping coffee before heading to work. My phone buzzed with a notification from my bank, low balance alert. I was confused, almost amused at first. How could there be a low balance when the $120,000 I'd been saving for my MBA was sitting untouched in my savings account? I opened the app, expecting some kind of technical glitch, but when I saw the $0 balance staring back at me, I felt my stomach drop. Someone had drained my entire account. Panic set in, but I didn't want to overreact. Maybe it was a bank error. Maybe some fraudulent transaction. I immediately called my bank, and after going through a painful series of hold music and security questions, the truth started to leak out. The money hadn't been stolen by some anonymous hacker or shady scammer, it had been transferred to a joint account holder. Here's the kicker, the joint account holder was my dad. The bank agent on the phone sounded hesitant, like they were used to dealing with messy family drama. I was too stunned to even argue or ask more questions. I hung up and sat there in silence, the coffee going cold in my hand. My mind raced. Was this some kind of mistake? Was my dad in trouble? Or worse, was it intentional? After pacing my apartment for an hour, I called my dad. It took him 3 rings to pick up. "Hey, sport," he said casually, like nothing had happened. His tone made my blood boil. "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "why did you take $120,000 from my savings account?" There was a long pause on his end. Too long. Then he sighed, and I swear I could hear guilt in his breath. "Look, son, we've been meaning to talk to you about this." I froze. "We?" The word hit me like a slap. "Who's we?" "Your mom and I," he admitted. "Look, it's not what you think. We had an opportunity come up. A house. A really nice house for your sister. And well, we figured we'd pay you back eventually." For a second, I thought I might pass out. "You stole my MBA fund," I said slowly, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "For her?" "Her. My sister, Claire, the golden child. The princess. The one who could do no wrong in their eyes." I could feel my pulse pounding in my temples. "That money wasn't a loan, Dad. That was everything I worked for. I've been saving for 5 years. Now, hold on," he said, his tone shifting to that annoying parental authority. "We're your parents. We sacrificed a lot to get you where you are. It's only fair you help the family when we need it." "Fair?" That word sent me over the edge. "Fair? You think it's fair to steal from your own son to buy Claire her dream house?" My voice was shaking now, and I didn't care. "You didn't even ask me." "She's your sister," my dad shouted back, finally breaking his calm facade. "She needed this, and we didn't have time to wait. Besides, you're smart, you're capable, you'll figure it out. Claire, she's been through a lot." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Claire had been through a lot. Claire, who had a cushy job at an art gallery my parents basically bankrolled. Claire, who they had paid off student loans for while I worked 2 jobs to save for my degree. This wasn't just favoritism, this was a betrayal. I hung up on him mid-sentence. I couldn't listen to another word. My hands were trembling so much I had to sit down before I collapsed. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the years of effort, sacrifice, and hope I'd poured into my dream. My MBA was my ticket to a better life, a way out of the shadow of their constant favoritism. And now it was gone, but I wasn't going to let this slide. For the next 2 days, I tried to reason with them. I sent texts, emails, even showed up at their house unannounced. Every time, I got the same condescending excuses. "You'll understand when you're a parent. Claire needed us. It's just money, you'll make more." Finally, when I realized they weren't going to budge, I decided to call in reinforcements. Uncle Damien was my mom's older brother, and he was the black sheep of the family, the one who'd made it big in business and wasn't afraid to call out bullshit when he saw it. Growing up, I'd heard my parents complain about how arrogant and ruthless he was, but I always admired him for speaking his mind. If anyone could help me figure this out, it was Damien. I called him one evening, and to my surprise, he picked up on the first ring. "Hey, kid," he said in his gruff, no-nonsense tone. What's up? I hesitated for a moment before spilling everything. The stolen money. The favoritism. The dream house for Claire. By the time I finished, I was practically shaking with frustration. There was a long silence on the other end. Then Damien let out a low whistle. Well, damn, he said. That's a new low, even for your parents. What do I do? I asked, feeling more helpless than I wanted to admit. He chuckled darkly. Oh, don't worry, kid. We are gonna fix this. And trust me, they are not gonna know what hit them. I didn't know exactly what he meant, but there was a cold determination in his voice that sent a shiver down my spine. If my parents thought they could get away with this, they had no idea who they were up against. Damien wasn't just going to help me get my money back, he was about to deliver a dose of karma that they'd never forget. The day after I called Damien, he showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to see him standing there in his signature black blazer, his salt and pepper hair slicked back like he just walked off a movie set. In one hand, he held a briefcase and in the other, a steaming cup of coffee. You look like hell, he said, stepping past me into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. Yeah, well, I muttered, rubbing the back of my neck. Losing your life savings will do that to you. He smirked, setting his coffee on my counter and snapping open the briefcase. Inside were stacks of papers, a laptop, and what looked like a small recorder. Don't worry, kid, he said. We are gonna make this right. But first, you're gonna have to trust me. What I'm about to do, it's not pretty. What does that mean? I asked, eyeing the recorder suspiciously. He leaned against the counter, fixing me with a serious look. Your parents screwed you over. Big time. But they didn't just steal from you, they probably broke a couple of laws in the process. Transferring that kind of money without your consent. That's fraud. And if they bought a house with it, that's traceable. But here's the thing, they think they are untouchable because they are family. That's where I come in. I wasn't entirely sure where he was going with this, but at that point, I didn't care. I just wanted my money back. So what's the plan? Damien grinned like a shark. Step 1, gather evidence. You're gonna give me access to all your bank statements, texts, and emails with your parents. Anything that shows the transfer, their excuses, all of it. Step 2, we're gonna dig into their finances. See how deep this rabbit hole goes. And step 3, his grin widened. We make them sweat. I raised an eyebrow. Sweat how? You'll see. The next week was a whirlwind. Damien was relentless. He spent hours combing through my bank records, tracking every penny of that $120,000. Sure enough, it led straight to a wire transfer into my dad's account, and from there to the down payment on a house. A house listed under both my parents' and Claire's names, but Damien didn't stop there. He dug into Claire's finances, too, uncovering years of unpaid credit card bills and shady loans my parents had quietly paid off. By the end of the week, he had a binder full of evidence that painted a pretty damning picture. Now, he said one evening, slapping the binder onto my coffee table, it's time for step 3. I leaned forward, my heart pounding. What's step 3? He smiled. Leverage. The following weekend, Damien invited me to a meeting at his office. When I arrived, I was surprised to see Claire sitting in the waiting room, looking annoyed and scrolling through her phone. What's she doing here? I hissed at Damien. He smirked. All part of the plan. Before I could argue, he ushered us both into his office, where a sleek projector screen was set up. Claire barely looked at me as she slumped into a chair, still glued to her phone. So, she said, why are we here? Mom and Dad said you were throwing some kind of family intervention. Not quite, Damien said, closing the door and dimming the lights. He pulled out a remote and clicked a button, and the screen lit up with a spreadsheet of transactions. What the hell is this? Claire asked, frowning. Damien leaned back in his chair, his expression cool and unreadable. This, he said, is a detailed account of how your parents stole $120,000 from your brother to buy you a house. Her face went pale. Wait, what? That's not true. Isn't it? Damien clicked through the slides, showing screenshots of the bank transfers, emails, and even a copy of the deed to the house with her name on it. You might not have known where the money came from, but you benefited from it. And now, you're gonna help us fix it. Claire looked at me, her eyes wide. I didn't know. I swear. Mom and Dad just said they were helping me out, like they always do. Helping you out? I snapped, my anger boiling over. They ruined my future for you, Claire. They didn't even ask. Okay, she said, holding up her hands defensively. I get it, all right. But what am I supposed to do about it now? Damien smiled coldly. That's the easy part. You're going to sell the house. Claire's jaw dropped. Sell it? Are you crazy? I just moved in. You think you get to keep it? Damien said, his voice like steel. That house was bought with stolen money. If you don't sell it and pay him back, I'll take this evidence straight to the cops. And trust me, your name on the deed makes you just as complicit as your parents. Claire looked like she was going to argue, but then she caught the look in Damien's eyes and thought better of it. Fine, she muttered. I'll sell it. But this is gonna ruin Mom and Dad, you know that, right? Damien shrugged. They made their bed. Now they get to lie in it. By the end of the meeting, Claire had reluctantly agreed to put the house on the market. But Damien wasn't done yet. He had one more card up his sleeve, one final twist to make sure my parents felt the full weight of their actions. Now, he said, turning to me with a gleam in his eye, we are gonna pay your parents a little visit. You ready to see some justice served? I nodded, my stomach twisting with anticipation. If Damien's plan so far was any indication, this was going to be one hell of a showdown. Damien and I arrived at my parents' house on a rainy Sunday afternoon. The sky was grey and heavy, and the storm rolling in felt like a perfect backdrop for what was about to go down. I was nervous as hell, but Damien was the picture of calm. He had that same briefcase with him, the one stuffed with all the evidence he'd gathered, and a look in his eye like he was about to enjoy this more than he should. Just follow my lead, he said as we walked up the driveway. And no matter what they say, don't back down. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. My mom answered the door, her face lighting up when she saw me. Oh, honey. What a nice surprise. Then her eyes shifted to Damien and her smile faltered. Oh. Damien. What brings you here? Damien gave her a polite but icy smile. Good to see you too, Margaret. Mind if we come in? She hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. Of course. Come in. The house smelled like coffee and candles, the usual cozy vibe they tried to maintain. My dad was sitting on the couch, reading the paper, and looked up with mild surprise when he saw us. Well, this is unexpected, he said. You could say that, Damien replied, setting his briefcase on the coffee table. We need to talk. The atmosphere shifted immediately. My mom and dad exchanged a glance, their smiles fading. What's this about? My dad asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. Damien didn't waste any time. He popped open the briefcase and pulled out the binder, slapping it down in front of them. This is about the $120,000 you stole from your son. The color drained from my mom's face. My dad sat up straighter, his jaw tightening. Now hold on a minute, he said. That's not stealing. We are his parents. We were just helping the family. Helping the family? Damien scoffed. You drained his savings account without his permission, used it to buy a house for your daughter, and now you're sitting here acting like you did nothing wrong. It's not like that, my mom said quickly, her voice shaking. We were going to pay him back. We just needed some time. Oh, save it, Damien cut her off. You didn't even tell him. You didn't ask. You didn't even give him a heads up. That's not borrowing. That's theft. My dad tried to interrupt, but Damien raised a hand. No, you don't get to talk right now. You had your chance to explain, and every excuse you gave was a load of crap. You screwed your son over, and now you're going to face the consequences. At this point, my mom was in tears, and my dad was glaring at Damien like he wanted to throw him out of the house. But Damien wasn't finished. He pulled out the recorder from his briefcase and set it on the table. This, he said, is a recording of Claire admitting she knew the house was bought with stolen money. She's already agreed to sell it and pay him back. But that's just the beginning. If I take this binder and this recording to the authorities, do you have any idea what happens next? Financial fraud, wire fraud, hell, I wouldn't be surprised if they added money laundering to the mix. You wouldn't, my dad said, his voice low and dangerous. Damien leaned in, his eyes narrowing. Try me. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the rain pounding against the windows. My mom was sobbing quietly and my dad looked like he was about to explode. Finally, he threw up his hands. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. What do you want? First, Damien said, you're going to apologize to your son. Right now. My dad's face twisted in anger, but after a nudge from my mom, he turned to me. I'm sorry, he said, his tone begrudging. Louder, Damien said, I'm sorry, my dad snapped, his voice rising, and Damien prompted. My dad sighed heavily. And I shouldn't have taken your money. It was wrong. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him, my anger simmering beneath the surface. It didn't feel like enough, but it was something. A second, Damien continued, you're going to pay him back. Every cent. I don't care if you have to sell the house, drain your retirement, or pick up a second job. You're going to make this right. Damien, that's not fair, my mom protested. Not fair. Damien barked a laugh. You think it's fair to steal your son's future for your daughter's dream house? You're lucky I'm giving you the chance to fix this instead of letting the courts handle it. My dad clenched his fists but didn't argue. He knew Damien had him cornered. And third, Damien said, leaning back in his chair, you're going to stop treating your kids like this. No more favoritism. No more guilt trips. No more acting like one child is worth more than the other. Got it? My mom nodded quickly, still crying. My dad muttered something that sounded like agreement. By the time we left, my parents had agreed to sell their house and pay me back as soon as possible. It wasn't a perfect resolution, there was still a lot of resentment and hurt, but it was a start. As Damien and I drove away, I turned to him. Thank you, I said. He shrugged. Don't thank me yet, kid. This isn't over. But trust me, karma's got a funny way of catching up to people like them. And as I watched my parents' house disappear in the rearview mirror, I couldn't help but feel like Damien was right. This was only the beginning. The fallout from Damien's visit was like watching a slow-motion car crash. My parents tried to keep up appearances, but the cracks in their perfect family facade were starting to show. Claire, true to her word and with a little more pressure from Damien, put the house on the market. She wasn't happy about it and avoided me entirely during the process, but I didn't care. It wasn't about her feelings, it was about getting back what was rightfully mine. The house sold within a month, and while the market wasn't as hot as it had been, it still fetched a decent price. Enough to pay me back every penny of the $120,000 they had stolen. When the wire transfer hit my account, I stared at the number for a long time, half expecting it to disappear again. It was surreal, like I had won a battle I never wanted to fight in the first place. But as satisfying as it was to have my money back, the damage my parents had done to our relationship was harder to repair. One evening, a week after I got the money back, my mom showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked tired, like the weight of everything was finally catching up to her. She sat on my couch, wringing her hands, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. I don't know where to start, she finally said. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. How about an actual apology? She flinched, but she nodded. You're right. I'm sorry, sweetheart. For everything. For the money, for how we've treated you, for all of it. Her voice cracked, and tears filled her eyes. We were wrong. I see that now. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But years of being the overlooked, underappreciated child weren't something that could be wiped away with a few tears and a half-hearted apology. It's not just about the money, Mom, I said, my voice quieter now. It's about how you've always put Claire first. No matter what I did, it was never enough for you or Dad. This just proved that. She started crying then, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But I pushed it down. I wasn't the one who needed to feel bad. I don't know why we did that, she said through her tears. Maybe we thought you didn't need us as much. You've always been so independent, so strong. We thought Claire needed more help. That's not an excuse, I said firmly. I needed you too. I just never got the chance to show it because you were too busy catering to her. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Oh no. Oh no. And I don't expect you to forgive us right away. I want you to know that we are going to do better. Your dad and I, we are in counseling now. We are trying to figure out how to fix this. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her to get out, to let her know it was too little, too late. But another part of me, the part that still wanted a family, couldn't completely shut the door on her. The next few weeks were weird. My parents were suddenly trying way too hard to make up for everything. They called constantly, asking how I was doing, offering to help with anything I needed. It felt forced, like they were ticking boxes on a checklist, but at least they were trying. Claire, on the other hand, was radio silent. I heard through Damien that she'd moved into a smaller apartment in the city and was furious with our parents for letting this happen. Apparently, she was more upset about losing her house than the fact that it had been bought with stolen money. Typical. Damien, of course, was thrilled with how everything had played out. Just as served, he said one night over dinner. And the best part? They'll think twice before pulling something like this again. Do you think they'll actually change? He shrugged. Hard to say. Some people don't change until they hit rock bottom. Your parents, they might be on their way there. But whether they change or not, you've got your money back and you've got your independence. That's what matters. He was right, but it still felt bittersweet. I had my money, sure. I could finally start planning for my MBA again. But the dream I'd had of my parents being proud of me, supporting me, feeling like I mattered to them, that dream was gone. One day, out of the blue, I got a text from Claire. It was short and to the point. I'm sorry for what happened. I didn't know the money was yours. Hope we can move past this someday. It was better than nothing, I guess. But I wasn't ready to forgive her or anyone else in my family just yet. I took Damien's advice and focused on myself. I started looking into MBA programs again, this time with a clearer head. I even found a mentor through one of Damien's business connections who helped me refine my goals, and slowly, piece by piece, I started rebuilding the future my parents had tried to steal from me. But the biggest surprise came a few months later. One evening, Damien called me out of the blue. You got a minute? He asked. Yeah, what's up? You're not gonna believe this, he said, his voice practically buzzing with excitement. Your parents, they sold their house. What? Yep. Downsized to a much smaller place. Word on the street is they are trying to live within their means now. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So they are actually changing. Damien chuckled. Let's not get carried away. But hey, it's a start. And if nothing else, you've got your life back. That's a win in my book. As I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, relief, it was all there, swirling around in my chest. But for the first time in a long time, I also felt something else. Hope. It had been nearly a year since the storm of betrayal, anger, and grudging apologies had swept through my life. By now, the dust had settled. My parents had indeed sold their house and moved into a modest bungalow in a quieter neighborhood. Claire was still distant, but I occasionally received updates through family grapevines. She was doing fine, though she hadn't forgiven anyone for losing her dream house. As for me, I was finally on solid ground again. With my MBA fund restored, I had been accepted into a top-tier program. The dream I thought had been destroyed was alive and kicking, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my future. But there was one more piece of unfinished business to address: my family. A few weeks before I was set to move to the city for my MBA program, my mom invited me over for dinner. At first, I wasn't sure if I should go. I hadn't been back to the house since everything happened, and part of me didn't want to reopen old wounds. But another part of me, maybe the part that still wanted to believe in family, said yes. The new house was smaller, humbler. The kind of place they probably should have been living in all along. When my mom opened the door, she looked older than I remembered, like the weight of the past year had aged her. I'm so glad you came, she said, pulling me into a hug. I stiffened at first, but then I let her hold me. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. The dinner was awkward, to say the least. My dad was quieter than usual, almost subdued, and my mom kept trying to fill the silences with small talk. At one point, she asked about my MBA plans and I told her about the program, the classes, and the city I'd soon be moving to. "We are so proud of you," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I set my fork down and looked at both of them. "You know," I said, "if you'd told me that a year ago, I wouldn't have believed you." My dad flinched, but he didn't argue. My mom just nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "We deserve that," she said softly. "Yes, you do," I said, my voice firm but not angry. "What you did, it broke something in me. It broke my trust, my faith in you as parents. And I don't know if I can ever fully get that back." My mom started crying then, and my dad reached over to squeeze her hand. "We know," he said, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "And we are sorry. For everything. We've been working on ourselves, trying to be better, but we know we can't undo what we did to you." "You can't," I said bluntly. "But maybe you can prove that you've changed." "How?" my mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, thinking for a moment. "By being consistent. By treating me like I matter just as much as Claire. By showing me, not just telling me, that you're different now." They both nodded, and for the first time, I saw something in their eyes that looked like genuine regret. Maybe Damien was right, maybe they'd had to hit rock bottom to realize just how badly they'd screwed up. The weeks leading up to my move were surprisingly nice. My parents didn't overwhelm me with calls or visits, but they made an effort to stay in touch. They even offered to help me pack, though I politely declined. Claire sent me a message the night before I left, a simple "good luck" with no punctuation, but it felt like progress. And Damien. He sent me off with a celebratory dinner and a long speech about how proud he was of me. "You've handled this better than most people would," he said, raising his glass. "You've got grit, kid. Don't ever forget that." Moving to the city was like stepping into a new chapter of my life. The MBA program was intense but exciting, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. My parents called every couple of weeks to check in, always careful not to overstep. At first, I kept them at arm's length, but gradually, I started to let my guard down. We weren't close, not yet, but we were building something new. Claire and I exchanged occasional texts, mostly small updates or memes that reminded us of childhood. She was still Claire, self-absorbed and dramatic, but there were moments when I saw flashes of the sister I used to be close to. And Damien. He was always there, my rock and my champion. Whenever I doubted myself, I'd think back to the way he stood up for me, the way he fought for me when no one else would. One day, during a break between classes, I got a call from my mom. She sounded happier than she had in a long time. "Your dad and I were thinking," she said, "maybe we could come visit you in the city sometime. We'd love to see how you're doing." I hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Yeah," I said. "That would be nice." The journey to rebuild my family wasn't over, and it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were heading in the right direction. Damien was right, karma has a way of catching up to people. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it also gives you a chance to start over. As I hung up the phone and looked out at the bustling city below, I felt a strange sense of peace. My parents had taken so much from me, but in the end, they couldn't take away my resilience. This was my life, my future, and no one, family or not, would ever steal that from me again. The end.